Warning, this video contains slight spoilers for Centuria, Agent, and Chainsaw Man. While I won't go into details, I will bring up story beats, so please keep watching at your own discretion. Immortality, or the ability to not die, is such a unique yet difficult narrative trope to write, not to mention write well. It forcefully redefines the extent characters can go to achieve their goals, and what they can gain or lose. On one hand, if the villain cannot be felled by regular means, how will the protagonist work around this problem and succeed, if they even can? On the other hand, how do you introduce stakes to a story where the hero is at no risk of death or injury?
I got a headache.
How do you kill something that is in most senses unkillable? And critically, how do you make it entertaining in both explanation and execution? While I may not be an expert, I pride myself on my decent media literacy. Plus, I for one love talking about the media I like. So, my name is Onyx, and on today's episode of This Week I talk about immortality, and how to break the unbreakable. Right off the bat, while the general idea of immortality is relatively simple, in my opinion, there are two main variations of the concept. So let me quickly break them down, explain them, and then move on to how they're utilized. Firstly is regeneration, the more well-known type of immortality. Think Deadpool and Wolverine with their healing factor. Or my personal pick, Andy from Undead Unluck. As the name would imply, any physical damage is regenerated, depending on the severity, almost instantly. While being unkillable, it doesn't necessarily make these characters as heavy damage can and will hinder or outright immobilize while regeneration. Although, that leans into the next section, so let's put a pin on that idea for now, while I move on to variant 2. That being revival, which is a pretty much post-mortem regeneration, but I'm being pedantic. Characters like Julian from Centuria, the hybrids from Chainsaw Man, and the demi-humans from Agent come to mind. Why are there more examples of revival compared to regeneration? Because I'm biased, that's why. Unlike the former, the immortal aspect comes from being able to come back from death. Although, an interesting aspect about this trope is in the name itself. It just reverses death, not any and all injuries. Again, another interesting point to discuss right about now, actually. Now that I've established the two types of immortality, let's finally get to the part we've been waiting for. Despite the supposed narrative power immortality provides, how do these authors still create tension, suspense, and stakes? Number 1. Why go for physical when you can go for psychological? An excuse for me to spout on about one of my favorite mangas of all time, Chainsaw Man. While I know that Chainsaw Man doesn't have a spectacular ending, call it burnout or disinterest, I still think part 1 at least was peak, and pretty much molded my taste into what it is today. Anyways, if you know anything about Chainsaw Man, you'd know that it isn't your typical shonen in the best ways possible. To sum up the necessary parts for this video, devils exist, are evil as shit, and Denji, the protagonist, an orphaned boy stuck working for the Yakuza, becomes a devil-human hybrid. Aside from the ripcord now lodged in his chest, being a hybrid makes him practically immortal, able to revive himself after consuming enough blood. And while it lends itself to kick-ass fight scenes and the good old hype moments in aura, he isn't necessarily in control, so to speak. Wink wink, nudge nudge. Without spoiling too much of the story, Denji, in pursuit of newfound dreams and aspirations, is manipulated by basically everyone he meets in some form or another. And, by the end, he's left an empty shell of himself, which then is taken advantage of, again, in a diabolical twist, but that's all I'll say. Go read it yourself. The main thing I'd like to highlight is that while Denji, or the Chainsaw Man, is practically a living weapon, the guy is only 16 years old when the events of the story occur, which is arguably one of the more tumultuous times of anyone's life, let alone for someone like Denji. Circling back to the video, Chainsaw Man shows us that while perhaps being physically impervious, the psyche is still just as vulnerable as any of us, and, while being unkillable, you aren't necessarily uncontrollable. Although death isn't an issue for Denji, sometimes you don't need to hurt the person to hurt them, so to speak. Number 2. When you can't hurt the person, hurt the people they care about the most. Probably the most self-explanatory one. Not much to say, but
let me break it down for you, Mark.
Another tactic that the authors use, not only in Centuria, but also Chainsaw Man to an extent, is the exploitation of personal relationships and the stakes that comes with losing those close to the characters. That being said, this trope relies heavily on who you kill and the established bond they share with the person experiencing said loss. I'll probably make a video on character death eventually, but who knows? Ooh. Anyways, Centuria, a manga I recently picked up that I think is one of those hidden gems that I haven't seen anyone talk about yet. Set in a medieval fantastical world with magical powers and gods, Julian, a slave his whole life, finds himself about to be murdered by the crew on board the ship, along with other 100 slaves. Being mistaken for sacrifices, Julian is then given the power of said slaves, their strength, dexterity, reflexes, and even their 100 lives by the god of the ocean. Already, this idea sets up stakes for Julian, as while he can come back to life, it's on a countdown. And later on, when he actually does die, we meet the person whose life gets taken away. So, while technically he is immortal, the fact there is a set limit already adds a decent amount of tension in his battles. Fun little caveat aside, what makes Julian so vulnerable, despite his invulnerability, is his views on human lives, only killing when absolutely necessary, or more importantly, if his family and friends are endangered. A core aspect of Centuria's conflicts revolve around the idea of Julian being nigh immortal, but his companions aren't, to a point where even characters acknowledge his weakness, that being his family. As, while Julian can hold his own in a battle, he cannot be everywhere at once, leading to tension being created when enemies deliberately drag his attention away from protecting the people he cares about. Add on the plethora of people with special abilities. Each battle fought without Julian feels like a ticking time bomb. Will the character be able to win, or hold out long enough for Julian to save them? Funnily enough, this trope can similarly be applied to One Punch Man too, in which characters are pitted in seemingly unwinnable situations, only for Saitama to one-tap the thing in the nick of time. In One Punch Man's case, it displays Saitama's overwhelming strength. Centuria's, however, shows that even Julian is just one person, despite the many he carries in his heart. That being said, with all these magical powers running around, how would our society deal with immortal beings? Well, let's find out in the next section. Because last but not least, while killing doesn't seem like a feasible option for taking out our unkillable friends, what about anything else? Fate similar or worse than death. See what I did there? Agent, Demi-Human, is the manga that focuses on immortality and how they would be dealt with in the modern day, if you ignore the stand-like entities that are the IBMs. The story revolves around the aforementioned demi-humans, people who can return from death. And the crux of the story is that they're treated less than human, the whole thing about people being scared of something they don't understand and all that. This section to me is just about pure creativity. Basically, taking the question, how to stop someone who can't be killed, and pushing it to its limits in both containment and combat. Like in Chapter 3, our demi-human protagonist, Ki Nagai, breaks his leg while being pursued. The key thing to note is demi-humans cannot regenerate minor injuries, only when they die. You know what bro does? It's implied he grabs a multi-tool and slits his own throat to regenerate his leg. Mind you, this is the same night he finds out he can't die, by the way. Diabolical stuff. This series does not shy away from showing the demi-humans getting wrecked, and sometimes wrecking themselves. One of the first things we're introduced to is the tranquilizer bullets. Why? Because aside from not dying, and the IBMs, a demi-human isn't that dissimilar from just a regular person. If stopping a demi-human with bullets won't work, why not just knock them unconscious? It's quite funny how simple it sounds, but I will not lie, it struggles to work as the story progresses, and the plot thickens. While these are the basic examples I will share, trust me when I say this series pulls many, many crazy stunts with its characters. In the end, this segment illustrates that making characters unkillable, while simultaneously still vulnerable, simply takes a little creativity. And the same goes for the scenarios you put them in. I don't want characters who can tank shit to not tank shit. Anyways, this script is low-key long as hell, so I'll wrap this part up here. In conclusion, what have we learned? Immortality makes characters incredibly strong, but not unbeatable. With the right tools, psychological manipulation, and means, threatening their loved ones, even the toughest opponent can be brought to their knees. That being said, if I've learned anything, maybe not pissing them off is the ultimate victory to begin with. This was pretty fun to make, given I basically just gushed about media that I liked, but whatever. And I hope you found it entertaining. and maybe a slight bit educational. That being said, if you made it to the end of this video, thank you. And I don't know, I'll be trying to upload more bi-weekly, so maybe stick around for more yap sessions like this one. Anyways, like, subscribe, and maybe even comment, and I'll see you around.